To promote the recognition of Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, we must awaken the West to the threat of Moscow, not just to Ukraine, but to humanity at large.
Will that be helpful? I think these kind of efforts on the diplomatic front are helpful to the cause, but at the same time, we must not forget that what Ukraine needs most at this time, and also I think going forward, is very concrete, specific help in terms of its military capabilities.
Hello and welcome to Ukraine in Flames, a special project by Ukraine Media Center and NGO Euroatlantic Course. My name is Anton Pechenkin, and today we'll talk about Russia as a sponsor of terrorism. Will Russia receive the status of a rogue state? If you want to know more, please subscribe to our channel to stay tuned and support us with your likes and commentaries. We read attentively every one of them. I am recording this episode in a very anxious moment, not only because of almost 6 months of full-scale invasion and daily missile and artillery attacks on the Ukrainian cities of Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, Nikopol, Bakhmut, and many other towns and villages by Russian forces, but also because of the very dangerous situation on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. According to the Ukrainian military intelligence, on August 19th, Russians may create a serious accident there, which potentially will cover a big share of the European continent by radioactive fallout. We analyzed this Kremlin's policy of nuclear blackmail and taken the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as a hostage in one of our previous episodes. Russia has two aims in that. First, just to steal the electricity and technical know-how from the nuclear station, and second, to get Ukraine and the whole world frightened, and thus to achieve, if not the strategic goal, to annex our country as a whole, then to win some armistice and some time to regroup its army and settle the occupational regime in the newly taken territories of the eastern and southern Ukraine. And thus, this behavior to frighten the opponent with something like a new artificial Chernobyl or Fukushima is nothing but terrorism. Obviously, it's not the first case in history when Putin and his KGB fellows act like this. There is a big suspicion that Putin's path to the absolute power started from blows of residential buildings in Moscow and over Russia in the autumn of 1999. Then, officially, these houses with hundreds of their inhabitants were exploded by the Chechen terrorists. These explosions raised panic among Russians, which helped Putin to become Yeltsin's successor as the Russian president. However, in September 1991, a residential building in the city of Ryazan was saved from the barbaric explosion. Locals found in the basement several bags with hexogen, as later appeared, and it was even officially acknowledged. These bags with explosive materials were set there by the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB. As they tried to convince locals, it was a kind of special training. Since then, Russians numerous times acted in a way when anyone could see. Lives of ordinary civilians cost nothing to Putin and his comrades. It was in 2002 during the terrorist attack on the North-Ost musical in Moscow. It was so in 2004 during the terrorist attack on a school on the city of Beslan, and it repeated again and again during the Russian invasion to Ukraine. The Russian army used Ukrainian civilians as a living shield while occupying Crimea, Donetsk and Lugansk regions. Very likely that the highest Russian commandment deliberately ordered to crush the MH17 flight over Donetsk region in July 2014. Russians acted as terrorists while shelling residential areas of Mariupol and Kramatorsk in February 2015, Aside Ukraine, it was Putin who authorized usage of the Novichok nerve agent against the British citizens in Salisbury in 2018. As we see, even before his Hitlerian step to totally attack Ukraine in February 24 this year, everything was clear about the methods and principles of Putin and his regime. However, all mentioned crimes were left unpunished. That was one of the reasons why the Russian regime felt free to start the biggest continental war in Europe since 1945, with massacres, with shellings of the residential areas and detention centers of Ukrainian prisoners of war, and with the nuclear blackmail. Now the world has many tasks to do for stopping this outlaw state, not even only Putin himself. And among these tasks is maybe symbolic but crucial one: to name things but their names, to proclaim Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. Our first speaker is Raimond Sohn, legal expert and chairman of Direct Initiative International Center for Ukraine. He explains why this task is so important for everyone.
To promote the recognition of Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, we must awaken the West to the threat of Moscow, not just to Ukraine, but to humanity at large. There is a notorious level of willful blindness among policymakers, experts, and media to what modern Russia is. And we need to make the world see clearly its grotesque nature. Putin's Russia is a captured facade state run by an authoritarian criminal mafia regime whose power rests on oppression, propaganda, and corruption. It is a totalitarian society which is indoctrinated with the imperialist, chauvinist, Nazi ideology of Russism. This ideology relies on the premise of superior greatness of Russian people, who have a special entitlement over other peoples. Moscow seeks global revenge. It wants to topple the Western-dominated world order. It defines itself through direct confrontation with democracies, willingly embracing the role of evil empire of the 21st century and building a new axis of evil. Russia is the biggest exporter of threats and instability. It is a terrorist state whose menace eclipses any other rogue actor on the planet since the Second World War, directly endangering humanity by its threat of unprovoked use of nuclear weapons. The Russian threat comes from its possible use of nuclear weapons, its massive propaganda, which dehumanizes various social, ethnic, and national groups, the devastating humanitarian and environmental consequences of its military actions, and from corruption of political and business elites everywhere. This is why we must explain to everyone that the world must stop financing the Russian terrorist state, as any economic dealings with Russia come at the expense of vital security interests of people around the globe.
Raimond Sohn continues. Unfortunately, the existing international system and international organizations proved themselves helpless to stop the Russian aggression, particularly because Russia enjoys a blocking package of influence in many of these international organizations.
International organizations, including those entrusted with safeguarding international peace, have proven incapable of dealing with Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Even after Russia was declared an aggressor by the United Nations General Assembly, no effective action followed. Special consideration is still given to Moscow at every turn. Designating Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism and its armed forces and so-called private armies as terrorist organizations is a key legal tool available at the national level that can substantially contribute to containing Russia. It will help achieve larger international political and economic isolation to deprive Russia of resources for further aggression. There are many legal complexities of such designation, but what is most critical now is the political resolve to act. On this, I commend Lithuania for its courage to declare that Russia is a state that supports and perpetrates terrorism. But only American designation can trigger serious international consequences for Russia, despite bipartisan support in the US Congress. The American government has been reluctant to follow through. The White House argues that recognizing Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism will close all venues for diplomatic negotiations with Putin, including on Ukraine, and will strain America's relations with European allies. These arguments do not withstand scrutiny. Russia has repeatedly demonstrated that its ultimate goal in Ukraine is the destruction of the Ukrainian state. Any talks will be used by Moscow to benefit its aggressive agenda. European states have been sponsoring Putin's regime long enough. It is in the direct interest of Europeans to have a safe continent, free from the threat of Russian aggression, regardless of the money some corporations stand to lose from Moscow's isolation.
Putin's regime and Russia in general wouldn't be so long living and with free hands if not for massive propaganda and its corruption ties in the United States, in Europe, and all over the world. Blaming Russia as a sponsor of terrorism won't be easy because of that, but on the other hand, this step will help to liberate the planet from the toxic and perversive Russian influence.
Russian tactics to prevent an effective international response to its aggression remain the same: intimidation, disinformation, and corruption. Russia will continue to sow transatlantic conflict by pulling all the strings the Kremlin has in Europe. It is very likely that Moscow will make new efforts to destabilize American democracy. We should also expect Russia to create new international crises where Moscow is going to try to make itself indispensable to solving problems it creates. This could happen in Ukraine, for example with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, in Syria, Moldova, Kosovo, or anywhere else in the world where Putin will be able to exploit some weakness. Hopefully, as understanding of this tactic grows, we will find more people prepared to stand their ground on principle despite any Russian blackmail.
Our last speaker for today is a guest from abroad, Raimond Kaljulaid, Estonian Member of Parliament and head of the Parliamentary Commission for the State Defense. Estonia is historically in vanguard of Ukrainian friends, so Mr. Kaljulaid expressed not only his position, but overviewed the situation, how the situation is moving in other European and NATO countries. First of all, in the United States.
I know it's under consideration to declare Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. That designation in international affairs, it's a designation by the United States State's Department, and there is a list of countries that are considered state sponsors of terrorism, and I know that there are those in the United States Congress who feel that Russia should also have that designation. Will that be helpful? I think these kind of efforts on the diplomatic front are helpful to the cause, but at the same time we must not forget that what Ukraine needs most at this time, and also I think going forward, is very concrete, specific help in terms of its military capabilities, and that means weapons, that means ammunition for the weapons, that means training for Ukrainian troops, it means all kinds of supplies that will help Ukraine actually conduct this war and push back against the Russian invasion and eventually push Russia out of its territory and liberate the areas that Russia has occupied. So I think, for sure, diplomatic efforts are very important and they do make a difference. But at the same time, I think, especially those in politics, those who have influence over decisions made by national governments in Europe and in the West, in NATO, have to keep in mind that the really decisive factor is the concrete, specific military help that Ukraine needs right now to defend its territory and defend the people of Ukraine and the country that has been attacked absolutely legally by the Russian Federation.
You have been watching this special project by Ukraine Media Center and NGO Euroatlantic Course dedicated to the Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine in Flames. In the description there is also information how personally you can help Ukraine in this struggle for our independence, and if you find our job interesting and useful, don't hesitate to like and share this video. Thank you for watching, and everything will gonna be Ukraine.